Suddenly dignified and somewhat morose, he started to walk up the broad stairs, and shifting my position but not actually following him up the steps, I fired 3 or 4 times in quick succession, wounding him at every blaze. And every time I did it to him, that horrible thing to him, his face would twitch in an absurd clownish manner, as if he were exaggerating the pain. He slowed down, rolled his eyes, half closing them, and made a feminine "ah!" And he shivered every time a bullet hit him, as if I were tickling him. And every time I got him with those slow, clumsy, blind bullets of mine, he would say under his breath, with a phony British accent all the while, dreadfully twitching, shivering, smirking, but withal talking in a curiously detached and even amiable manner, "Ah, that hurts, sir. Enough. Ah, that hurts atrociously, my dear fellow. I pray you desist. Ah, very painful indeed. God! Ah, this is abominable. You should really not." His voice trailed off as he reached the landing. But he steadily walked on, despite all the lead I had lodged in his bloated body. And in distress, in dismay, I understood that far from killing him, I was injecting spurts of energy into the poor fellow, as if the bullets had been capsules wherein a heady elixir danced. I reloaded the thing with hands that were black and bloody. I had touched something he had anointed with his thick gore. Then I rejoined him upstairs, the keys jangling in my pockets like gold. He was trudging from room to room, bleeding majestically, trying to find an open window, shaking his head, and still trying to talk me out of murder. I took aim at his head, and he retired to the master bedroom with a burst of royal purple where his ear had been. Get out of here," he said, coughing and spitting, and in a nightmare of wonder I saw this blood-spattered but still buoyant person get into his bed and wrap himself up in the chaotic bedclothes. I hit him at very close range through the blankets, and then he lay back, and a big pink bubble with juvenile connotations formed on his lips, grew to the size of a toy ballon, and vanished. I may have lost contact with reality for a second or two. Oh, nothing of the "I just blacked out" sort that your common criminal enacts. On the contrary, I want to stress the fact that I was responsible for every shed drop of his bubble blood. But a kind of momentary shift occurred, as if I were in the connubial bedroom, and Charlotte was sick in bed. Quilty was a very sick man. I held one of his slippers instead of the pistol. I was sitting on the pistol. Then I made myself a little more comfortable in the chair near the bed and consulted my wristwatch. The crystal was gone, but it ticked. The whole sad business had taken more than an hour. He was quiet at last. Far from feeling any relief, a burden even weightier than the one I had hoped to get rid of was with me, upon me, over me. I could not bring myself to touch him in order to make sure he was really dead. He looked it, a quarter of his face gone, and 2 flies beside themselves with a dawning sense of unbelievable luck. My hands were hardly in better condition than his. I washed up as best I could in the adjacent bathroom. Now I could leave. As I emerged on the landing, I was amazed to discover that a vivacious buzz I had just been dismissing as a mere singing in my ears was really a medley of voices and radio music coming from the downstairs drawing-room. I found there a number of people who apparently had just arrived and were cheerfully drinking Quilty's liquor. There was a fat man in an easy chair, and 2 dark-haired, pale young beauties, sisters no doubt, big one and small one, almost a child, demurely sat side by side on a davenport. A florid-faced fellow with sapphire-blue eyes was in the act of bringing 2 glasses out of the bar-like kitchen, where 2 or 3 women were chatting and chinking ice. I stopped in the doorway and said, "I've just killed Claire Quilty." "Good for you," said the florid fellow as he offered one of the drinks to the elder girl. "Somebody ought to have done it long ago," remarked the fat man. "What does he say, Tony?" asked a faded blonde from the bar. "He says," answered the florid fellow, "he has killed Q." "Well," said another unidentified man, rising in a corner where he'd been crouching to inspect some records, "I guess we all should do it to him some day." "Anyway," said Tony, "he'd better come down. We can't wait for him much longer if we want to get to that game." "Give this man a drink, somebody," said the fat person. "Want a beer?" said a woman in slacks, showing it to me from afar. Only the two girls on the davenport, both wearing black, the younger fingering a bright something about her white neck. Only they said nothing, but just smiled on, so young, so lewd. As the music paused for a moment, there was a sudden noise on the stairs. Tony and I stepped out into the hall. Quilty, of all people, had managed to crawl out onto the landing, and there we could see him, flapping and heaving, and then subsiding, forever this time, in a purple heap. "Hurry up, Q," said Tony with a laugh. "I believe he's still—" He returned to the drawing-room. Music drowned the rest of the sentence. This, I said to myself, was the end of the ingenious play staged for me by Quilty. With a heavy heart I left the house and walked through the spotted blaze of the sun to my car. 2 other cars were parked on both sides of it, and I had some trouble squeezing out.